What if I told you that the plastic cup that you just tossed into a Starbucks recycling bin will never actually be recycled? Our guest is Susan Keefe. Susan founded a consulting business called EcoForward, which is certified as a California green business, and she also works as the Southern California Director for Beyond Plastics. She is an environmental advocate fighting to reduce single-use plastics via education and the creation and enforcement of strong plastic policies. She also works to expose false recycling claims and demands honesty from corporations and local municipalities. Last year, Susan personally investigated Starbucks' so-called recyclable plastic cups alongside her colleague, retired chemical engineer Jan Dell. They brought the story to CBS television to prove that despite the custom-labeled recycling bins found in many Starbucks stores, the plastic cups and lids aren't being recycled at all. And the reason? It is not economically or technically feasible, and there's no market for them. So at the end, the plastic ends up in a landfill, or even worse, it's being incinerated. All of this plastic is then piled up and consumers are being misled. But thanks to relentless advocacy and media investigations, Starbucks has finally begun transitioning away from plastic cups in certain states in the United States, which is a small but crucial first step. In this episode, we will dive into Susan's groundbreaking investigation, why corporate accountability is critical, and what you can do to be part of the solution. If you've ever believed in the power of recycling, you need to hear this conversation. So let's get started. You are listening to Health, Happiness, and Planet podcast, where we explore different ways to boost our well-being, live a more fulfilling life, and protect our planet. Join me as I chat with inspiring people and professionals from all over the world, uncovering strategies for improving our lifestyles and nurturing our precious planet. I am Juan, and this podcast is proudly brought to you by Wave Business Excellence Footprint, my digital training company that cares about your career and personal development. I am passionate about making the world a better place, so if you share my enthusiasm, this show is for you. Together, we can steer towards a healthier, happier life while leaving a positive footprint on our beautiful Earth. Join me as we explore how being healthy, happy, and caring for our planet are all connected. Hello, Susan, and welcome to the Health, Happiness, and Planet podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Juan. I'm happy to be here.
It's so nice that you took the time to speak about such important topics. I hope a lot of listeners will have some learning nuggets out of this conversation. And before we start, could you just give us a quick background? How did you get to where you are today? And what inspired you for this passion for sustainability and reducing plastic pollution?
Well, that's a terrific question. I actually started off my career in technology. I worked for nearly 30 years in technology, most notably at a little company called Oracle Corporation. And I was really just focused on helping my, software customers get results from the investment they made with Oracle. But about 10 years ago, my kids were in primary school, I really started thinking about the impact that people, corporations, governments were having on our environment. I watched a lot of nature documentaries. I read books about it. One of the books that initially influenced me is a book by Paul Hawken. I think it was written in 2017. It's called Project Drawdown. It's kind of a sobering look at climate change, but it's also a very hopeful book. I like hopeful books.
Yeah. Yes.
Because it focuses on our unique ability as human beings to solve those challenges, and it goes through, the different solutions. That book really inspired me to start looking into this a little bit more. I lived most of my life in San Francisco, Northern California. My kids were born there, raised in Oakland, right across the bridge, and I had a few years in Portland, Oregon. So I was kind of living in a little bit of a sustainable bubble. in those cities, right? There was a lot of focus on sustainability and a way of life. Of course, recycling was a big part of it, and even composting, which is pretty new to many places in the United States, but kind of started there. I was always a very careful consumer. I rejected fast fashion. I bought secondhand, ate healthy organic food, some of which, of course, I grew in my urban garden. But I always wondered what else I could be doing to impact all the pollution that was leading to global warming. And some of the factors I thought about, naturally the fires. I'm sure many of your listeners have followed the fires in Los Angeles recently, and these fires have been going on for more than a decade. We don't have a fire season anymore. I mean, last year the fires here happened in January, right? Which is not fire season.
Yeah.
Fire season is supposed to be in September and October. And just seeing the impact that that's had on our planet. I've also seen a lot of pollution during my travels that really affected me. You know, when you kind of walk around California, you don't see piles and piles of pollution, right? It's all tucked away in landfills, and, we don't see it. I mean, yeah, you see the occasional plastics, of course, that are kind of floating around in the air, but you don't see it like when you go to India or when you go to certain places in Southeast Asia. I mean, it's really quite startling. And I started to think about, what are we doing with all the waste in the United States? I mean, we're pretty big consumers here.
Yeah.
Fun fact, and this was actually on the CBS Starbucks episode that I think you watched. The U.S. actually leads the world in plastic consumption, generating approximately 97 billion pounds, which I think is about 45 kilos, maybe billion kilos of waste every single year.
Wow. It's hard even to imagine that amount in my head, because it's just like, I would probably have to put something next to it, like, I don't know, how many Empire State Buildings would that equal to or something?
A lot.
Yeah.
There is a figure, and it's like, buried all of New York City 2 miles deep.
Wow.
It's just outstanding, right? So clearly there's a lot of waste being generated in my country. So I just thought about, like, how does this affect our landfills? Where is it all going? Is it being recycled? I mean, the big difference between those countries that I mentioned in Southeast Asia and in India in particular is that we have tighter environmental laws. We have better infrastructure. We're able to bury our plastics and our waste that maybe other countries can't. And we rely heavily on this idea of recycling, which we'll touch on obviously later. And then the other thing that really inspired me, and this is really personal, several years ago, and I don't remember how, I must have been just online, looking at stuff, I came across this TED Talk. It was called The Legacy of Plastics. And I was like, okay, I'm interested in that. And this is right about the time that I had just left my job at Oracle. I pre-tired, I don't want to call it retired, but I pre-tired to focus on what I could do to help impact the environment in a positive way. And I was still trying to search on, am I going to focus on food waste? Am I going to focus on all the textile waste? And then I came across this TED Talk, and it was by an environmental sociologist. Her name is Rebecca Altman, and she's from San Francisco. I didn't know her at all. And she talked about how all the plastic that was ever made is still with us. And it's in the form of microplastics, and I like to refer to that as plastic shards, like little tiny pieces of plastic, because plastic never degrades or breaks down, it just breaks up over time. She then shared this experience with her father, who worked for a plastics industry making polystyrene. And polystyrene is the kind of plastic, it's known as number 6, if you look at like the little chasing arrows, it's on everything. And that's what's used to make styrofoam. But there's also rigid forms of it that's not blown, and that's used to make things like coffee lids. Anyway, she told this story that really shook me up, and even just thinking about it now kind of just shakes me up. And it inspired me to take up the work I'm doing. So she goes on this road trip with her dad to the state of New Jersey, which is where I grew up. I grew up in New Jersey. And I started to get this kind of sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't quite know why, because I hadn't put 2 and 2 together yet. They go to this closed plastics factory where he used to work, and they end up in the actual town where I grew up.
Wow.
Called Toms River. Toms without an apostrophe, just Toms, T-O-M-S,
yeah.
River. And it was here that her father brought her to a park. It was kind of overgrown, and she's describing it. It wasn't like very well maintained. Just on the outskirts of Toms River, and I don't know what actual one of the little towns. And it was here that he brought her to a memorial that honored nearly 90 cases of children who had died of childhood cancer between 1979 and the early 1990s. I left in the mid-80s to go to university in Pennsylvania. This was a startling amount of young people to die in this period of time. The town only had about 45 to 50,000 people, right? So this is not a big place. As she's viewing the memorial, this gust of wind comes out, and at her feet is a plastic coffee lid. And she turns it over, and it's got a number 6 on it, which means it's made of polystyrene. And I just was like, oh my God. She's like viewing this kind of memorial to these children who died. And I got chills because right then I realized that the reason those kids died was because of a Swiss chemical plant that was in my town, less than 2 kilometers from where I lived, called Ciba-Geigy. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's now been bought by other companies. And I was literally stunned, Juan, that I never actually thought about or even knew about this sad legacy of the town where I grew up in. And a lot of these children were girls. For whatever reason, more girls died than boys. And I just thought, oh my God, I am so lucky that I am still here. Yeah. So I researched it, and I found out this terrible story of corporate corruption and greed and government deception that not only polluted the Toms River, but was channeled out to the ocean. So much it would make your head spin. Thousands of barrels of plastics and chemicals and dyes buried in the back of egg farms. It was just incredible. There's actually a book, and I have it here. Yeah. I never finished it, Juan. I couldn't. It's called Toms River.
Oh my God.
And it won the Pulitzer Prize. I never knew about this book, about my hometown. And it's just shocking. So as I said, I recently have retired from Oracle, and I consider myself now one of these lucky children who didn't get sick. Toms River is now a Superfund site, you know, parts of it, not all of it. I never really went back there much, you know, after I left for college. So I just kind of disconnected. But this childhood legacy, I think, just really compelled me to want to learn all I could about plastics and the chemicals used to make plastics, so I could help reduce their use and the impact that it would have in other communities. Yeah. Wow. So that is what inspired.
Yeah, that's an amazing story.
I mean, I get choked up when I think about it, because I can't believe how close I lived to all of this.
Oh, wow. It reminds me of a documentary well, it's not a documentary, it's more a movie that was in Netflix not long ago. I think it's still in Netflix, and whoever's listening to this is year 2025. And it's called Toxic Town.
Okay.
And this was also based on a true story, but it was in the UK. And it was a very, very similar scenario like you mentioned as well, where there was a company who was doing their whatever they do with their production, and they were not following the instructions and the guidelines as they should with the security for not allowing these chemicals and heavy metals that they were working with. But it definitely, it was transported as well through the air. People were just breathing in these toxins.
Breathing it.
And that's how they got later on ill. And lots of babies who were born, they were born with deformed hands or deformed feet. Just now, as you were explaining this, what happened in your town, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, there are more places in the world that had similar situations. Yeah, and if I think about other countries like in India or anywhere else where have less regulations than here in Europe or in the US, it's very, very scary, and therefore it's a very big problem that I hope many people will be able to solve in the future. And that's why I'm so happy that you're really dedicating yourself to combat this type of business. People should be aware, if I work for a corporation that is producing something bad for others or for the environment or us and the environment, we are all one, because we are nature. So that means that there's so much to do. Yeah, there's so much homework that we need to still work on.
There is so much to do. Yeah. In these corporations, I mean, this was again back in the, I don't know, I think the late 50s when they came to Toms River. But that was after they had already polluted the Ohio River. they got booted out of, Ohio. I think they were in Ohio, but they had polluted. They were basically putting all their plastic chemicals and junk into the Ohio River. And then they thought, well, where can we find a small town who kind of needs like
Yeah.
jobs, right? And they found Tom's River.
Wow.
And they were able to work with the, local government, and kind of like everyone sort of turned a blind eye to what was going on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where the corruption and deception, comes in,
That's
right?
right.
So,
And that's the danger when there's too much money involved, that sometimes you just say, well, let's follow the money, let's follow the trail and see what we find.
yes.
But for that, I do have a very interesting question that I know that I was waiting very eagerly to hear the answer here. And you have embarked on a project together with a good friend of yours who conducted a groundbreaking investigation into
Yes.
Starbucks plastic cups. So could you walk us through why you chose Starbucks and what you discovered?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it was last summer. I had gone into a Starbucks here in Orange County, where I live in California, and noticed a something kind of interesting. Because I hadn't seen this before, but to be honest, I usually go to small coffee shops. I don't go to Starbucks that often, unless I'm somewhere where there aren't any small coffee shops. And anyway, I looked and I saw this recycling bin. And it wasn't like just a recycling bin with the chasing arrows. It said like recycle here. It was a custom designed recycling bin. And it had images of Starbucks cups, their cold cups, the plastic cups, the lids, the little trays they use for packaging. Basically said, put it all here. And I thought, well, that's really strange. None of that stuff is recyclable. It's single-use plastic, and it's made of polypropylene, number 5 plastic, which isn't really recyclable anywhere, because I had done a lot of research at this point. And I knew that single-use plastics were trash. So Jan and I collaborated on this because she also had discovered this. We were originally kind of focusing on the lids, the hot cup lids, which were prevalent in San Francisco and other markets. But the cold cups were really interesting because that represents, at least then, I think still now, about 75% of Starbucks business are in these cold drinks, right? They come in all different sizes with this big, dome lid, which is also recyclable according to their custom bins. And I thought, wow, here is the largest coffee chain in the entire world with over 40,000 locations worldwide, deliberately telling their customers that their single-use plastic is recyclable via their in-store bin, because the images say, put your stuff here. This is just propagating the myth of recycling, as if there's some magic factory that Starbucks has somewhere that's going to turn all of this trash into, well, nothing, into something. I just was shocked. So Jan and I decided to glue air trackers into the cups.
Wow.
We would sometimes sit in front of Starbucks and then we'd just be gluing them in and chatting. And then we just walk in and drop them in the bin that says, put these cups here. We'd take a picture of it and then we'd follow it on our phone to see where it would go. And of course, it went straight to landfill. It didn't even go to a recycling center. I mean, not that there are, it wouldn't, to a collection and sorting center, I should say. They don't do recycling at those centers, right?
Yeah.
It didn't even go there. It went right to landfill. We even get up early and follow the trash trucks to the landfill. Because that was just part of like the investigation, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to see, okay, here it is. It's pinging. I'm following it. I'm following it. I'm following it. Whoop, there it goes.
Yeah.
So we did this with, I think overall in Orange County, we dropped about 8 trackers, and we had data, and we dropped some more that died, they got crushed or whatever, but none of them pinged from a recycling factory or even a sorting facility. So Jan had contacts at CBS in New York, corporate, and took the story to them, and it was pretty exciting. CBS jumped right in and decided to put out their own trackers, which was really cool, right?
Yeah.
And they did this in 18 affiliate cities across the country.
Amazing.
It was amazing. And the results were pretty much similar to ours, right? They put out, I don't remember what the total was, but of the ones that say it was 40 or 50, some of them get crushed.
Yep.
Some of them never get out of the store, right? Because even with my tracker, I saw an employee in there with a thing just shoving all the plastic down. I'm like, no, don't break my tracker, But out of the trackers that CBS put out, 36 of them continued to ping. And out of those 36, 32 went straight to landfills or incinerators or waste transfer stations, which is really just a place where they collect all the waste and then send it to a landfill. So basically, none of them were ever destined to be recycled. And 4 of them pinged at locations that, quote, accepted plastic for recycling. But again, that does not mean that they were ever recycled.
Yeah.
So it's like 90%,
Yeah.
right? And probably 100% because those other 4 probably were just taken to a landfill. Anyway, so it was a really kind of eye-opening investigation, and all of these different affiliates did their own story on it. So it aired all over the United States the first week of December. They did interview Starbucks, who claimed that it was a shared responsibility and said it was very disappointing and that their cups are designed to be recycled, but actually couldn't name where they go. Later on, they came back with a factory in Alabama and I think another small factory, because again, accepting and collecting doesn't mean it's actually recycled. It doesn't mean there's an actual end market for this toxic trash.
Exactly.
Which is what single-use plastic is. Anyway, it was, there's just no factories that want it.
Yeah, and especially that they are marketing it there in the shop, showing the customer, look, here is the recycling bin, please sort it out. Maybe there's one for the cups, one for the lids, one for the plastic spoons, so that the customer actually believes, oh, look, they're doing something. There is a process behind it. And in reality, there was nothing behind it.
There was nothing behind it, and other than deceiving customers.
Yeah.
Because customers can feel better. I mean, most people care. People are trained to recycle.
Yeah.
We've been trained for decades to recycle. So you see something, you're like, oh, look at that. And you put it in and go, okay. But without that, I think people will start to question, like, where does this end up? Oh, I don't want to put it in the trash. I feel bad about that. So it kind of, relieves people of their guilt and contributes to plastic pollution.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's why, I jumped on the Starbucks thing. I mean, it's a lot.
Is it true that some of those facilities who receive the plastic, they even burn it? Is that true? Because I know that there are some of the landfills and there are others who actually burn some of that stuff. Is that correct?
So there were, I forget exactly how many, but out of the 32 that pinged at landfills, some pinged at incinerators and some at waste transfer stations. Now, in California, we don't incinerate plastic. But there are places, again, this aired nationally, so there are places across the country that do. And so imagine living next to that incinerator or in an adjacent community. A plastic cup from California is now being incinerated in, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I had a tracker that went there.
And it depends in which direction the wind is blowing. Then some parts of the town are being more affected than other parts. And all these families and children who are breathing that in. It's hard to believe that today, in this era that we're living in, that we think that we are in such a modern world, that everything is so regulated, that the government is doing everything possible to protect their citizens. And there is actually no protection or big regulations.
Well, and especially for citizens that live in poorer communities. Next to these industrial areas, right? They're the ones that are actually bearing the brunt of all this waste and the chemicals that they're exposed to.
How sad. And one thing that I'm very curious about is how come that plastic recycling, and particularly for the single-use items like cups and lids, not economically or technically feasible to be recycled? How is that possible?
Yeah, well, I'll just start by saying that the majority of plastics cannot be recycled, and they never have been. And they never will be. It's not economically feasible because virgin plastic is super cheap to produce. And recycling is expensive. So starting and running a recycling facility is expensive. So it doesn't make sense economically, right? If you follow the money, it's like, why recycle when, we could just make new plastic? Recycling is energy intensive. It uses lots and lots of water. There's lots of manual touch points, where people have to sort all this stuff, right? Because everything kind of gets thrown in to one bin in a lot of cities across the United States. I'm not sure if it's that way in Europe, but we have like one bin for everything. Plastic, aluminum, glass.
Yeah, I mean, here as we do have that in Europe quite often, that you can separate glass, plastic, paper, and then organics. But the recyclable ones with all the plastics, it's also known that it's just a small percentage that's being recycled. Yeah.
Yes. And, in order for plastic to be considered recyclable, there has to be an end market for it. I mean, somebody's got to want to buy the recycled waste, right? And it's toxic. And I'll get into the technical part in a minute, because in most post-consumer plastics, the end market is not compelling enough for them to sort and bale it and send it to a factory. The most common plastic that's recycled is called PET plastic. It's number 1 on the little symbol that you'll find on many plastics. That's what water bottles are typically made from. And HDPE plastic, which is number 2. Containers are made of that, some jugs are made of that, like detergents, and some bottles are made of HDPE as well. Recently, I read this in a report not too long ago that the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, conducted a 10-year review on plastic recycling and concluded that, quote, "It appears that at the present only 2 types could be considered for making into high-quality objects, PET and HDPE. Specifically those that are sourced from bottles." And guess what? This still holds true in 2025. And this was years ago. And I like to talk about recycling in quotes because at best, those plastics that I just mentioned are downcycled once or maybe twice. And that is very different when you compare that to products like aluminum, which is infinitely recyclable. And, just in my state alone, we have had factories that actually recycle these PET bottles close in the past few years. Why? Because it's not a moneymaker. So even the most commonly, quote, recycled or downcycled plastic, there's no money in it. The technical reasons, Juan, that plastics can't be recycled directly impact the economics, right? Because plastics are made from fossil fuels, plus thousands of chemicals, as much as 16,000 chemicals. So it's mind-blowing when you think about all the different kinds of plastics that are out there. Even if you just look at PET, right, the bottles, that same plastic resin is used to make clamshells that we can buy our berries in, or that we use for packaging for takeout food and things like that. Guess what? Those cannot be recycled with the bottles, even though they're fundamentally made of the same basic building block, because of the process to make them, the actual end product, as well as the different chemicals that are added to make each individual product. Plastic was never designed for recycling. It is technically very, very difficult, and there's no money in it. And that's a big reason why it's not happening. Technically speaking, a plastic cup, and we know they're not being recycled because that's a different plastic anyway, and there's no factories, but a plastic cup cannot be made into another plastic cup.
Yeah.
A plastic lid cannot be made into another plastic lid. So it's just ridiculous. And then here in the US, we have curbside collection. And so when I first moved into my house here in Orange County, and they've changed this recently, but when I first moved here about 5 years ago, my recycling bin said all plastics, 1 through 7, because those are the codes on the plastics, and shoes and clothing, and just throw it all in the bin. And I'm like, that's weird. There are no factories at any scale that are actually recycling number 3 through 7 plastics. So, my mantra is always show me the factories. And in the CBS LA segment, it's really interesting because the reporter, Ross Colombo, goes to one of these, they call it a MRF, a material recycling facility, but there's no recycling that happens there. They just collect, sort, and then bale individually all these different kinds of plastics. Again, 16,000 chemicals. You can imagine how many different kinds of plastics you have, right? Colors and shapes and all this stuff. Anyway, he holds up a cup and he says, "Do you recycle these cups?" He goes, oh yeah, we recycle them here. And then he says, well, do you recycle them here? Oh, no, we send it out. I was like, well, where does it go? Oh, that's private information. So it's really unfortunate and enlightening, right? When I tell people this, that plastic is fundamentally not recyclable.
Yeah.
And then when I shared with people that many of our plastics here in California end up getting trucked to Mexico, where they don't have as strong environmental laws. And by the way, they don't have much water either. So I don't know what they're doing with it. It ends up polluting their country, or it gets exported to countries in Asia. Even China was taking it for a while, not anymore. Turkey, I think, has decided to stop taking it. Thailand's deciding to stop taking it. So then that means it's going to get sent to other states that we can pay to incinerate it for us, because it's a huge problem.
That is so crazy. All that
It is.
information you just provided, it's like,
Yeah.
wow. It's like, where do I even start processing some of that information? Yeah, little by little. I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the misconception that people have is that, well, first of all, that everything that gets thrown into the recycling bin will be recycled. That's the one misconception. Then the other misconception is that that plastic cup will become someday another plastic cup. That's another big misconception
Another
that you just
misconception.
yeah,
Yep.
and it's not like glass that you can say, okay, glass can be melted and it will just make another cup out of it. With plastic, that's not possible. And
Not possible.
I mean, and all the other facts you just gave, it's wow.
It's technically impossible to do it in any way that would be economically sound.
Yeah.
That is why it doesn't happen. Another point to remember is the millions of microplastics that are generated in plastic recycling. Again, plastic recycling involves washing. And so all of that wastewater contains microplastics.
Wow.
And that ends up at waste treatment centers, and most of those cannot filter out the microplastic. So it ends up in sludge that either goes to landfill or goes into our waterways. It is incredibly concerning. So I always tell people there is nothing clean and green
Yeah.
about plastic recycling. It's not a silver bullet. We don't need to recycle more. We need to stop using so much non-recyclable materials, right?
Correct.
And that's why I don't like to talk about the percentage of plastics that are recycled. Because I'll sometimes say 5%, and people say, is that a global number or is that a US number? And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter if it's 5%, 6%, 9%. None of it's good,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? We just need to stop making plastics for single use. That represents almost 50% of all plastics that are produced. Can you imagine if we just stopped using so much unnecessary plastic?
Yeah.
How that would impact our world?
Yeah, and our health as well, because in
Our
the
health,
end of the day,
which we'll get into.
exactly, yeah, because it's really scary what microplastics can do to our endocrine system and our hormones and everything. But we'll
Yes,
definitely get to that in a moment.
that could
And
be a whole separate segment.
that's right, that could be another episode for another rabbit hole we can go down into.
But I do think it's important, Juan, to mention, and my husband and I were talking about this morning about it when I was kind of mentally preparing to chat with you today. And he said, until you started working in this space, he goes, I never thought about the chemicals in plastic. Well, nobody does.
Yeah,
It's not like you get a plastic cup and it says, here are all the ingredients,
yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah,
And those chemicals, in addition to the fact that you're trying to recycle an oil and gas product, which is hazardous waste, and then you combine the chemicals, you're just trying to recycle a bunch of chemicals.
exactly. And at the end, nobody really knows what effect does it really have on our system, on our body, on our environment, because
Yes.
maybe in a decade from now they will know, oh yeah, that type of plastic with that type of chemical was producing this type of outcome, but they'll only know it after the fact. And when already a lot of people have passed away, a lot of people have suffered with illnesses, and then whatever we're using at that point of time, it's with a new chemical, because they say, oh, it does not contain that chemical, but nobody knows what that new chemical is producing, yeah, to our endocrine system and our hormones and our body. And
That's right. Right.
And that's why it's like really, really important that we just stop using that type of product.
Yes.
Just stop the hemorrhage. Yeah.
Stop the head. Turn off the tap is
Yeah.
what we like to say.
Exactly. Turn off the tap. Yeah. That's absolutely the right term. Time for a quick break to mention that the sponsor of this podcast is Wave Business Excellence Footprint, a digital training company deeply committed to your career development, personal growth, and the well-being of our precious planet. Dive into a wealth of knowledge with over 20 courses available on our website, www.wave-bef.com. Tailored for both managers and employees aspiring to become tomorrow's leaders. One of our best-selling courses is the Presentation and Communication Skills Training, perfect for those creating and delivering presentations in their companies. Whether through video conference or live meetings, if you want to convey your message effectively and do an outstanding job, this course equips you with the skills to be a better creator and presenter. Check out the testimonials on our website. The results speak for themselves. During my time in the corporate world, I often wished I had the opportunity to access such courses at the beginning, making my learning experience quicker. And now, one further topic before we jump back to the conversation. For those of you resonating with the themes of health, happiness, and planet, discover information about our 3-day retreat in Spain by reaching out to my team at the email address hhp@wave-bef.com. You will obtain further information about our life-changing retreat held once a year, together with some of our remarkable podcast guests. Each retreat is unique, leaving you energized with a set of simple tools to take control of your health and happiness sustainably. And the best part, you will be surrounded by like-minded individuals, ending the retreat with a personal action plan shared regularly within the group. And I'm so curious now regarding the story from Starbucks.
Yeah.
Now, Starbucks has started shifting to reusable and compostable alternatives in some of their states. So do you see this as a genuine step forward, or is it just another corporate PR move?
So I think that the CBS story was a major embarrassment for the company. I mean, the company is already, they changed CEOs last year, and they were kind of like really trying to look at their strategy. And I mean, they still have tremendous market share. They're the largest coffee chain in the world, but I think this was a big embarrassment for them. I think it pushed them to move ahead of schedule and roll out some of the sustainable goals that they had made remarks on in, I think it was 2030. It was later. It wasn't as early as this, right? Yeah. They have been working with a company called Huhtamaki. I think they're out of Finland. Fiber-based cups that are opaque, right? So not what the TikTokers want to see, because they want to look at their pretty colored frappuccinos and different drinks.
Yeah.
So they were looking at those, and I applaud Starbucks for moving ahead of schedule and for starting a pilot in 14 states, and I think it's 560 or 80 stores, by offering alternatives to plastic cups. I have not seen them in Orange County yet. I think Orange County will come along at some point, but at this point, they're waiting to see what the pilot looks like and dealing with positive and negative feedback. Again, not TikTok friendly, but I say just take the lid off and take a picture from the top. I mean,
yeah.
And be happy that you're not using a plastic cup and a plastic lid for, all of 10 minutes. I also applaud Starbucks for using actual ceramic cups for dine-in. So they had a thing, if you watch the CBS episode, they talk about the fact, well, you could just bring your own cup to Starbucks. And okay, even me being a big environmentalist, I don't always remember to bring my own cup. I might be out and about and I'm like, I just want to get a coffee and I want to sit in the cafe and drink my coffee. If I'm in Europe, I will be served a ceramic cup. But at most places in the United States, Starbucks and others, you are not served a ceramic cup. You are served it in a paper cup or a plastic cup, even for dine-in. And I think it's a tremendous burden to just tell customers that they need to bring their cup when they go to a store. So great, if you bring your own cup, you get a 20 cent or 25 cent discount. But more importantly, Starbucks should be doing reusable cups in all of their stores if people are dining in. And they've started to do that in those same 14 states, which I think is very encouraging.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So but I am annoyed at one
Yeah.
thing. Well, I'm annoyed at several things, but one thing in particular, they have not removed those bins.
Oh,
They're still, I saw them in New York. I saw them in Barcelona
yeah.
when I was in Barcelona. I saw them all over Orange County. So they still have the lying bins in their stores. I don't know why they haven't removed them. I've written to them, of course.
Oh.
They don't really want to talk to me. I think other people need to start complaining.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's even another aspect that I just thought about at this moment, that when you have hot liquid inside of a plastic cup, does not even produce more chemicals going into that liquid that you're drinking?
Yes, anytime you change the stability, I'm not a chemist and I'm not a chemical engineer and I'm not a scientist, so I may not say this exactly right, but when you're changing, like that's why you shouldn't microwave anything in plastic.
Exactly.
Even though we get these containers that say 100% microwavable, because you're heating that plastic up and that's going to affect the chemicals that are in the plastic. And yes, those chemicals now have an opportunity to leach into your food. So serving any kind of hot liquid in plastic is not a good idea. I mean, with Starbucks, those are mostly cold drinks, but still, you take a plastic cup that's at room temperature and you put a bunch of ice in it, you're still changing the chemical stability, right? By now you're making it really cold. So it's really not a good idea because that causes those microplastics to actually leach out. There have been studies, over the past few years about plastic bottles, how dangerous they are because there are hundreds of thousands of microplastics found in one plastic bottle. Because guess what? You put water in a bottle, you put it in a hot warehouse, you then truck it across the country or fly it in cargo or however you're transporting it. They're going to have all these times where that unstable, it's hot, it's cold, it's hot, it's cold. Every time I see kids and people drinking out of plastic bottles, I'm just like, oh my God, please don't do that.
Yeah. Oh no.
And never microwave in plastic.
Yeah,
Ever.
that's right. Now, if I think about when you do get these microplastics in your body, I've also somewhere seen some scary statistics that they say after so many days that you're actually ingested like a credit card size of plastic, that is inside of your system. And if they would make, let's say, a view of your brain or any organ, that there's always already some type of microplastics there. And that is so scary to hear.
Yeah, it is scary. I mean, I won't comment on whether it's a credit card or a spoon or, but we know that it's there because plastics do not ever break down. They don't degrade. They don't biodegrade. They just break up. As I mentioned earlier, into microplastics, like I talked about in the sludge of waste recycling. But even as you're just disposing of a plastic in landfill or wherever, or plastic that gets into the environment, which plastic gets into the environment all the time, that plastic will just break up into smaller and smaller and smaller parts. Fragments, I like to call them plastic shards. I heard that recently. I'm like, that's a really good, because microplastic sounds a little techie, and then nanoplastic sounds even more techie, but that means it's smaller than microplastics. And the thing we know about small things in the environment, they're a lot harder to clean up. They can quickly get everywhere. And the studies in the last 5+ years have shown, especially in the last 4 years, have shown that plastics are everywhere. They're in the soil, they're in the air we breathe, they're in our water. There's this film, I don't know if you've seen it, it's a documentary called We Are All Plastic People Now.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
Highly recommend that film.
Okay.
It is a little, they're all a little bit sad, but it's also like this idea of us ingesting plastic. And they talk about a lot of the studies in that film. And there's a statement in the film that really resonates. And I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember exactly what it said, but it basically said something like, we are all part of a toxic experiment and we did not give our consent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So that's a really good film to watch. The other thing I'll comment on is I'm sure many of your listeners have heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah.
It's, out in the Pacific Ocean, and it's, a huge area of concern. And I think when people think of a garbage patch, they think about like bottles and things floating around. Well, that's not what it is. I actually did a tabling event last year, and I did use AI to create an image for me of toxic smog.
Yeah.
Because that's what the garbage patch is. It's all these little micro and nanoplastics that have broken down over time and collected. Because what happens, and this is really interesting, as you have a piece of plastic that's really tiny with chemicals that are part of that plastic, those chemicals attract other chemicals that are in the air.
Oh, wow.
And they get attached to them. And then other chemicals get attached to that, and other chemicals get attached to that. And suddenly that piece of plastic that may have had X number of chemicals now has lots of other chemicals that were airborne.
Wow.
And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's affecting all of us. It's affecting our sea life, right? Our marine life.
Exactly. Then comes the fish eating the plastic, and then the bigger fish eating the smaller fish, and at the end, we eating the
Exactly.
fish and ingesting all of that.
Of course, we're ingesting it. I actually stopped recently eating, I love sardines and I love anchovies. I stopped eating sardines and anchovies from anywhere in California because we've had these terrible fires and now everything is so polluted,
Yeah.
From LA on down. And I don't want to take any chances because, of course, those are the smaller fish. So those smaller fish are eating the plankton that are affected by, it just goes on, right? So it's really, really troubling, to see what's happened. And every organ that's been tested for plastics, Juan, every single organ has found plastics. Every single one. It's been found in breast milk. It's been found in the placenta. It's been found in our organs. And it's been found in our brain. So there are a couple studies that have showed not only has it been found in our brain, but they compared a study from 2016 to 2024. And the people in 2016 had less plastic in their brain than the people in 2024.
Yeah. Wow.
And they've linked it to dementia. People with dementia had higher amounts of plastic. It's all really concerning. As I said, we could do a whole episode and probably have a doctor or a scientist that can go on into more details and cite more and more studies. My big concern right now is that because of all the cutbacks happening in the United States in terms of research, that some of this research might be stalled, at least in our country. But, the hope is that research will continue globally on this issue.
Wow. That is quite eye-opening, even for me, because I already thought I knew enough about plastic, and now I think I've learned much, much more. And I'm sure that my listeners are like, okay, should I continue listening?
Yes,
because this is
keep
quite scary
listening.
stuff. Yeah.
There's hope.
Exactly. So we're going to end it in a good note. Before we get there, I'm very curious. You recently joined Beyond Plastics as their Southern California director. What are your main priorities in this new role?
Yeah, so I'm thrilled to join them. I started in basically early February. They are an educated, experienced, and super passionate organization. They're based out of Bennington College in Vermont, so I'm a remote employee. Their mission is to end plastic pollution everywhere, which I totally support. It's big, it's lofty, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's great. Working with them is allowing me to leverage some of the deep policy expertise that they have at Beyond Plastics, and they have proven advocacy work that they've been doing mostly on the East Coast. And they have this great network of people that all have a similar mission, reducing plastic at the source and systemic change, which I believe in. So my priorities are really to organize and build a more cohesive grassroots coalition here in Orange County, Los Angeles, and San Diego. So that's what I've been working on the past few months. I am continuing to focus on outreach and education to communities. I'm continuing to debunk false recycling claims. And it's not just because it's fun to use trackers, but it's also because as long as there's a myth of recycling, it will hinder our efforts to reduce it.
That's right.
Right? I'm also working a lot on monitoring state policies, identifying existing laws, and demanding strong enforcement. We have a lot of laws here in California that have been passed at the city and at the state level that are not being enforced. And one example of that, a campaign I'm working on, is our ban on polystyrene foam, aka styrofoam, that was banned on January 1st in California, but I can still buy it on Amazon and have it shipped to my house.
Oh, wow.
So I've been documenting that and taking it to the media and working, trying to get people to sign a letter that we're going to send to the governor of California to demand enforcement, right? Because what's the point of having a law if it can be broken? So I'm also really following new state laws because there's always some doozies that come out that are actually going to hinder our progress again rather than help. And I work on ideas and new laws for ways to close loopholes on some existing laws that are bad. We have one on, those little plastic rings that keep beverages together.
Yeah.
We still have those in California, even though there's an old law, I think from the late 90s, that supposedly banned them. But as long as they are biodegradable, plastic biodegradable, then the rings can stay. And I'm like, what? So I put together ideas for how to close that loophole and to actually pass strong legislation because we have plenty of alternatives to plastic rings for keeping bottles together.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I'm working on.
Very nice. That's a very exciting job description. And that's
A little bit of everything.
Exactly. Wow. And maybe this brings me really good to my next question. That is about what can local governments do to hold corporations accountable for their sustainability claims and their plastic waste? Does the government do anything about that? Or is it just small companies, let's say like you, who just try to bring it to the news and try to really, show what's happening? So what is your viewpoint on that?
Well, I can only speak for some of the laws in California. Like, for example, the foam law that I mentioned, there's a fine of $50,000 per incident per day, and 0 fines have been assessed. And I can buy it in retail stores, and I can ship it to my house. So I think that what governments can do is they can not only pass, but enforce the law that disallows recycling claims. Number one, I think that's a huge one. Also disallowing these non-transparent and burdensome take-back programs. I don't know if you have them there in Spain, but we have all kinds of these programs where you can take back these hard-to-recycle things and drop them off somewhere or pay to have it shipped somewhere. They're completely non-transparent, and again, I think people wanting to do the right thing, just do it. We should disallow those, or if we're going to allow them, we should absolutely require full transparency of the responsible end market that this toxic trash is going to, and I think they would stop. Another great example, Juan, of accountability is, I don't know if you've heard, but the California government sued ExxonMobil.
Oh, yeah, I did hear about that.
Yes, this year, I think it was January, for decades of deception about their recyclability claims of their plastic products. They are the world's largest producer of single-use plastic. This lawsuit has been the most important legal action so far in the fight against plastic pollution. And so my hat's off to Attorney General Bonta, and all the people that helped him with the lawsuit. They've been actively promoting recycling for decades to people.
Wow.
So it'll take years, right?
Exactly.
But, when you think about the money, we talk about money, we spend over $1 billion a year in California just managing our plastic waste. So, why wouldn't we want to have laws that reduce that cost and protect our residents and protect our environment?
That's a win-win-win situation.
It's a win-win-win. Exactly.
Yeah. If I think about all that type of greenwashing that a lot of corporations are doing, what are some of those common greenwashing tactics that you have seen so far that make consumers think that they're being eco-friendly?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think one of the most egregious claims are this claim of 100% recyclability. I even saw that on one of these plastic clamshells that hold berries. And of course I called the company and no one ever called me back, but it said 100% recyclable. We don't have factories that recycle those.
Yeah.
So those egregious claims, in addition to, of course, the chasing arrows that the labels, that people associate with recycling, most of that is greenwashing. Starbucks, of course, is an example of greenwashing with their custom bins. The take back programs that I mentioned, right? Basically, companies using third parties to take back their hard to recycle stuff. That's an example of greenwashing because they're trying to just make their customers feel good about the products they're buying and say, well, put it in this bin and then we'll take care of it. And, again, trackers have proved that these things do not go where they're supposed to go. And also all this toxic trash just gets shipped around, at thousands of miles, gets flown places, shipped around, sometimes exported. There's also a lot of greenwashing techniques with so-called bioplastics. I don't know if that's something that you're seeing much of in Europe, but they'll even say, made of corn, and it'll look and feel like plastic. And I always say, if it looks and feels like plastic, it's basically plastic. It's not to say that they're using fossil fuels to make the base plastic. But in order for a product made from corn, which is what most of these things are made of, to be plastic-like, they've got to add additives. They've got to add chemicals. There's no ingredients. It's not like you're buying, it's not food, right? You're just drinking from that cup that's supposedly clean and green. And I think that's a really good example of greenwashing because even when you think about that product being made from corn, that had to be farmland that was set aside to grow this corn for those products, and they're using herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers, and the runoff is polluting, and then they're using additives to give it color and to make it look plastic-like.
Yeah, that's very, very good to know because I was also somehow deceived a little bit by that marketing where it shows, oh, this is all made out of corn and it's now much, much better than what we have used before. But it's definitely opening now that question in my head. So like how, it's not just 100% corn. Yeah. What are the chemicals that were used in order to create that plastic looking like bag that they're just putting all their produce inside? So yeah, thanks for clarifying. Yeah.
Well, and it's better to go with paperboard or a molded fiber than a bioplastic product for something that's disposable, for a convenience thing.
Exactly.
One other thing I'll say, and this is interesting because an article just came out yesterday about this. Again, local and state governments who are passing laws that only lead to more plastic consumption due to these outrageous false recycling claims. And the waste management companies play a really important role too. And people don't really think about that. So any waste management people who are listening to this will be like, that's not true. But remember when I said the EPA stated in the 90s that only PET bottles and HDPE bottles and jugs are recyclable? An article came out last week from Washington State reaffirming that only PET bottles and HDPE bottles, post-consumer waste, actually go to plastic recycling factories. And given our production amounts in the United States, there are only enough factories here to handle 25% of our production.
Crazy.
So wrap your head around that. And then it actually stated, quote, any plastic item, washed yogurt cups, takeout containers, plastic tubs, for example, coming from this area in Washington that is not a bottle or a jug is incinerated. Yet, our waste management companies continue to collect this, and this is complete and utter greenwashing. And guess what? We, the customers, are paying for this. We pay for recycling.
Yeah.
So I think this is like the ultimate in greenwashing. We should know where the waste actually goes, but they do not tell us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. Thanks for shedding some light on that. Shedding light on that darkness.
We'll get into some more positive things now.
Yeah. So maybe if I think about my next question, which would be, how can all of us push businesses and communities, maybe local governments to move towards a sustainable alternative? So what actions actually do make a difference? What would you recommend?
Well, I always say that one of the reasons I join forces with people like Jan and Beyond Plastics is we cannot create a sustainable future alone, right? We have to join forces, we have to organize, and we have to speak up. I think talking about this is really key. The other day, I went to a business that I love, and I've always been like, oh, they use these big plastic takeout containers, and I almost never get takeout. So I finally said, can I give you some alternatives? Like, it would be so much better for you, for our planet, for our health, and actually about the same cost as those plastic containers. So I think it's okay to nicely and kindly, restaurants, it's hard for them. It's hard to make a profit and it's a tough business. But I think, speaking up and going to a business that you care about or, that you frequent and asking them, also asking businesses to only do upon request for cutlery and things like that. Even if it's made of bamboo or it's not a bioplastic, right? It's made from something else. It's still wasteful. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm bringing my stuff home, I don't need to have all this cutlery, right? So an upon request, I think, is another thing that we can do. Getting to know your community and city leaders is so important. So important. Attending, I don't know exactly how it works where you are, but we have city council meetings where we have elected officials that kind of make decisions on our behalf. Attending those meetings, making public comments, starting a petition if you see something that you don't think is right, writing a letter to your local paper, writing an op-ed piece, finding people in your community who are experts in toxicology and pollution and maybe having a panel. We had a terrible fire here, Juan, a year and a half ago. A big Navy hangar caught on fire. I can actually almost see it out my window still, the remnants of it, and burned for 3 weeks, spreading toxic chemicals all over our community and for miles and miles in Orange County. And so I helped put together a panel of toxicology experts from University of California, Irvine, and from the Department of Toxicology Services. I didn't know anything about this, but I was like, you know what? They do.
Yeah.
Let's bring them together. We met in our community center. I think those are things that people can do. Especially if they're living in a community where they're getting the brunt of really bad pollution. Help organize a film screening. Mm-hmm. We Are Plastic People Now is one that I plan on organizing film screenings around. Get yourself out there and involved with these kind of things. It really does make a difference. Mm-hmm. One person really can make a difference, but you're better together.
That's right, absolutely.
So find a friend.
Yeah, and once the awareness is out there, then we can be more conscious consumers. When the next time we're out in the supermarket or the next time we go buy something, we purchase something, then we're just going to think, okay, am I going to take that product that has plastic with plastic wrapping and a plastic bag around it, or am I just going to choose something else that does not have all that packaging with it? Or you just decide, do I really need that product? Yeah, can I live without it? Yeah, and so it's just like, stop it at the source. Yeah, if it already contains plastic, maybe you can just think, okay, let me just not buy it on purpose because that company needs to learn that whatever comes with plastic is not going to be purchased. So if all of us start having that awareness, and then corporations will start realizing like, okay, I'm not really selling more because people are somehow more aware about that plastic issue. So maybe I will have to start coming up with some good ideas on how to fix that problem so that we can bring our sales back in, because they're always such number-oriented managers in these corporations. And that's why I think it's really so powerful that each one of us has the power to really move that decision-making in each of those corporations.
Absolutely. It's interesting. It's something my kids, my friends, and my husband are always like, I notice plastic everywhere now, thanks to you. Sorry. Because they do, because like you're so used to it being this ubiquitous thing. Mm-hmm. And now suddenly it's like, well, wait a minute, we don't need all this plastic. This is completely unnecessary. Exactly. You could be a really careful consumer. Well, first of all, by not consuming as much, number one, as you just pointed out. But two, if there's something you're ordering online, go and research, call the company, find out how they're going to ship it. That's what I do. I do not buy from any company. I will honestly say this, and it does take a little more work, but I also don't feel like I don't need that much. I could rather go to a local business and buy it off the shelf than get a box that's filled with bubble wrap and, styrofoam and all this other stuff for like, a jar of jam.
Yeah, exactly.
That happened once, so that's why I'm bringing that up. My husband bought that. I was like, are you kidding me?
It's so crazy. Yeah. I mean, I even noticed that some friend of mine ordered a foam roller, which is something that he just rolls on for his
Sure.
muscle
I use one
tension.
every morning.
Yeah, it's so
Mhm.
fantastic to have a foam roller at home. But he ordered it and it arrived to the house, and the foam roller was packed in foam thingies, yeah, and plastic little
Yeah.
bubbles and stuff. I'm like, why would they want to package a foam roller as if it would be glass or something, yeah? And it's just
Yep.
crazy. You just can put a foam roller in a box and that's it. Yeah, it's not going to break.
I know. I know. And the other thing I'll say is promote the companies that are doing the right
Yeah.
things. When you find a company that's able to ship dishes, for example, that I found, all in paper, all in corrugated cardboard, where they actually took the cardboard and made a pillow out of it, just used the air, natural air, and not a single thing broke. Not a single thing broke. It was amazing. So I posted it on social media and I shared it with everyone I knew. And I mean, there's a lot of things to be negative about, but let's, applaud these companies that are doing the right things because they're out there.
Definitely, definitely. And I think as more we are giving out this awareness, like
Hmm.
either through these podcasts or through the initiatives that you are doing with the company, that I think that the future generation will be then, of course, the future leaders of some companies and corporations, maybe small businesses, maybe medium or large size
Yes.
businesses, then hopefully they will start making other types of decisions for that company and make much better products and much better decisions for our planet. So that's my hope. And
My hope too. My hope too.
how can everyday consumers now contribute to a positive change without feeling overwhelmed by the scope of this environmental issues? Because in this episode today, we mentioned quite a lot of scary things, which is good because we need to see what is the severity of this problem that we have.
Hmm.
But then on the other side, of course, we would like to know, okay, now that we know the problem, what can we do about it?
Yeah. Well, the good news is that about 80% of people polled globally want to stop plastic pollution.
Yeah.
And even in the US, we're such a divided country right now politically, but most people agree plastic is not good.
Mm.
So I think there are a lot of things one can do. I will say don't jump into like trying to solve the global plastic treaty right away. I mean, the next meeting's in Sweden, I think in August. Look, that's really hard work and that's good work that's being done. But I just had this conversation with someone recently who was like, what do I do? And she sent me all this massive amounts of stuff. And I said, focus on yourself first and foremost.
Uh-huh.
Start with you because you have the most control over your own behavior, right?
Yeah.
Look at what you do. And I'm not saying that you have to do it perfectly. Rather have 1,000 people do it imperfectly than one person do it perfectly, right?
Yeah.
But focus on what you have control over, which is your own buying habits, your own home, things that you do with your own life. Consume less, reuse more, kind of common sense, refuse single-use plastics as much as you possibly can. Can't always, but as much as you can. And then take what you've learned and that change that you've seen in yourself and move out locally and start working in your community. I did this last year, actually. Tomorrow is a 1 year anniversary. I finally got my community to stop using single-use plastic for our little community events. I'm like, well,
Yay.
here are some things we can use. Let's do a
Yeah.
cost comparison. And it was negligible, Juan. It was negligible. And let's use some reusables. But it took someone, me, you, whoever, you see something that you maybe can have a modicum of control over,
Hmm.
start there because that kind of makes you feel like, yay, I did something. I had some impact. And then you can maybe take it to your local government and then you could take it beyond, right?
Yeah.
But starting locally where you live, I think is what I always tell people to do. And then follow, different groups that are really
Hmm.
good groups that are not promoting false recycling.
Yeah.
Beyond Plastics, obviously, in the US, I think is a good one. Plastic Pollution Coalition is another good one that I partner with. I'm partnering with them on this foam enforcement thing. The Center for Climate Integrity is a wonderful US based organization. They had a new publication, I didn't read it today, a new report. They had one called The Fraud of Plastic Recycling that came out
Hmm.
last year. It was fantastic. They have a new one, I think it's called the promise, the fraud of chemical recycling. I didn't read it, I just saw it really quickly. They're always coming up with new, really well-researched reports. The Basel Action Network, which is all about supporting the Basel Convention Treaty for contamination and toxins. That's another one, BAN, it's based in Seattle. So these are some things that I think people can do. Of course, Greenpeace and IPEN, the International Pollutants Elimination Network, are global organizations to follow. And of course, follow the fight for a global plastics treaty. But I think starting with yourself and working out from there is a great way to get going.
That's right. It builds up like a snowball effect because you already have that synergy. When you know that you have done an impact in your community for a small topic, then you just make it bigger and bigger, and at some point of time you just have that dynamic and it just starts rolling, and then maybe bigger things will happen out of that.
Yep.
So thank you for that advice. It's really very motivating then to really start small, because sometimes if you see that huge problem, you say, wow, how am I going to just solve this big problem? But yeah, just start small.
Start
At some
small.
point of time, it will evolve and develop even bigger. So despite the current recycling challenges that we have at the moment, where do you see the greatest opportunities for innovation and improvement?
In that TED talk I mentioned earlier, another thing stayed with me, and that was the word plasticity. In botany, that means a species that can rapidly evolve in response to environmental conditions. And it's a mechanism for survival. And I think we as humans are incredibly creative. I always crack up when people say, I'm not creative. I'm like, are you human? Yes, you are. I have no doubt we can survive this. We're about 4 generations in to this creation of a plastic world that we live in, and we have a choice. You know, we can fight for truth and change. We can call out plastic recycling for not being honest. We can turn off the tap, as we talked about. And while I wish that we could implement refillable, reusable systems everywhere, that would be amazing, but that's unrealistic. But what is realistic is what we see at airports. Right? So many airports, you can go and fill up your water bottle with a system that's got a filtration on it and people feel good, it's maintained, kept clean. Why don't we do that in all schools?
Yeah.
Why don't we do that in parks? Why don't we do that at train stations? Building out that infrastructure alone would save so many plastic water bottles
Exactly.
from existence, right? Or do what Paris is doing, right? You could just
Yeah,
go
Paris.
up to
Yeah, that's right. I was just going to say that. Yeah, I know that Paris just implemented that, I don't know,
They
a few
did.
years ago. And now they're doing it here in Valencia as well. So when you
It's
walk in the city,
fantastic.
every few blocks you see like some water filtering system where you can just go and fill up your bottles. It's amazing. Yeah, that
Yeah, it is amazing. And as far as disposables go, I mean, the growth and availability of more sustainable non-plastic alternatives is definitely happening. Recycled paperboard, as I mentioned earlier, for containers, for takeout. Hemp is a great material. Molded fiber, which comes from agricultural waste. So we're not growing crops of corn
yeah.
specifically to make this, right? Those are more sustainable products to use. Bamboo. I also read earlier this week, the Mars company, which is a massive company, recently developed 100% recyclable wrapper for one of their products, aptly named a Kind Bar.
Uh-huh.
So not having everything wrapped in plastic, having companies innovate and invest in these alternative, more sustainable technologies, it's happening. I can find mushrooms now in a paperboard with a cellulose window instead of plastic. And
Nice. Yeah.
so that's really exciting. And as I said earlier, I think we just have to keep praising and supporting those companies that are doing the right things and take a little time to seek them out because it is happening. Innovation is happening.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
I do have a final question, which is the same question I ask all of my guests, and it is, what is your definition of happiness?
Yes, I've been thinking about that. And like many of your listeners, I've had some rough patches in my life, right? We all have, and we continue to kind of navigate that. And as I've gotten older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I'm learning to accept the things and the people that I cannot change. without denying the difficulties and the hardships, right? I'm not saying that those things don't matter, but it's like, there's a certain amount of acceptance. And so I was thinking about this last night, and there's this James Taylor song. Do you know who James Taylor is?
Yes, I've heard about him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. He's like kind of a famous folk singer, poet from like the 80s, 70s and 80s. He has a song called The Secret of Life. And it's about enjoying the passage of time and just being grateful for kind of where you are. And I hum that song to myself a lot, just because I love it. I love the words. There's another song that he has called Up Air MA. And this is a great song when I'm feeling really down, because it's been a journey up a sacred mountain in China called Mount MA. I think I'm saying it right. And the song is about the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
And there's a verse that goes, we could have guessed we are already blessed right where we are. And I just think that's beautiful. I love it so much, because to me, happiness is about focusing on loving what is, even if my knees don't always do what I want them to do. And I'm really lucky, Juan. I have a whole lot of love in my life. I have a lot of support. My family, I have 3 beautiful children, my dear friends. And even though the work I do can be sobering at times, and it feels sometimes like an uphill climb, I really try to focus on the positive.
Yeah.
Because positive always beats negative.
Yeah, exactly.
And, our choices really drive and define our behavior. And I've noticed that happy people tend to live happy lives. So I'm choosing to be a happy person.
Exactly.
Working in waste management.
Absolutely. That is so nice a way to end this episode. Yeah, fantastic. If whoever's listening to this podcast are intrigued and would like to learn more and would like to maybe support you in some of the projects that you're doing, how can they reach you, and where can we find out more about your work?
Oh yeah, so I'm on social media. I have my consulting firm, EcoForward. I have my handle is, what is my handle? EcoForward SoCal, at EcoForward SoCal, all one word. And I'm also on Blue Sky. I need to post more, at Stop Plastic Waste. I joined early, so I got a really good handle. And then I have a website. It's also called ecoforward.com. And then you can find me, of course, on the Beyond Plastics website. And there's a link to email me or get in touch with me there.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to put all of that into the show notes so that whoever cannot take notes at the moment can just click on those links. So thank you so much for this lovely conversation. And we just covered so many topics. It's like, wow, it's mind-blowing. And but I'm glad we did not just put the finger in the wound. We also were speaking about root causes and solutions. And this also gives definitely a lot of hope that we will manage to survive as a species and that we are going to solve this plastic problem at some point of time.
Thank you, Juan. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Same here. Thank you so much, Susan, and hope we'll keep in touch for the future and seeing all the great benefits out of these projects that we're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that wraps up our amazing conversation with Susan, who is a strong environmental advocate, investigator, and is devoted to help us reduce plastic pollution. In this episode, we uncovered the hard truth behind plastic recycling, especially within major corporations like Starbucks. We talked about the myth of recyclability, the dangers of microplastics, the role of government in enforcing environmental laws, and how greenwashing continues to mislead well-meaning consumers. We also spoke about actions, how movements like Beyond Plastics are making a real impact, how innovation is driving change, and how each one of us can start by rethinking our own consumption habits. To learn more about Susan's work, check out EcoForward and Beyond Plastics. And remember, change starts with awareness, but it continues with action. If this episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast, share it with a friend, and leave a rating or review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this episode. Your support helps more people discover these important conversations. Thanks for being part of these meaningful conversations. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious, and keep working towards health, happiness, and a thriving planet. Big hugs, everyone.